Hey, Shia, do you have any advice for anybody that's trying to grow their local Cube playgroup?
Do it! Just do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday, you said tomorrow, so just do it! Make your dreams come true! Just do it! Nothing is impossible! No, what are you waiting for? Do it! Just do it! Yes, you can! Just do it!
The microphone.
All right.
Okay.
Dokie. Hello and welcome to Lucky Paper Radio, the first new episode of Lucky Paper Radio in the new year. I'm Andy, and I'm here, as always, with my co-host, Anthony. When's he coming home for Christmas, Maddox?
You know when I'm coming home, I'm already home? Oh, wait, where's home? I'm confused.
This is what all of my extended family said after they met you at Thanksgiving. They were like, he's great, when's he coming home for Christmas? Everyone loved you.
Okay, well that's great. That makes me feel great.
My Uncle Stan was like, he's great, he drinks wine, he's so good at cutting food.
Yep, those are my main skills.
Yep, you were very helpful. Everyone was like, he was so good in the kitchen.
Wow.
What I'm saying is you're setting too high of a bar. You're making me look bad. Could you chill out with that a little bit?
I can't believe that's true.
In our year-end episode, Anthony, you mentioned that your Cube level up moment last year was putting a concerted effort into building our local Cube playgroup, very successfully so. And we mentioned maybe we would talk about that in a future episode. And I got to say, we got a lot of requests to talk about this topic. I think a lot of people out there are in a position where they maybe have a Cube and they want to play it more, but are struggling to make that a part of their regular local Magic communities.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge part of Cube, obviously, is actually having people to play it. And I think it's one of the more challenging parts about Cube, to be honest.
Oh, for
a lot
sure.
of people come into the Cube Discord that we're pretty active in, and they're, interested in getting feedback on the design and the structure and their archetypes. And then they're like, but, I don't really have anybody to play with. And it's like, yeah, that's the difficult part. Maybe focus on that a little bit. But, I mean, obviously all the theory crafting's fun too, but this really is one of the biggest challenges of Cube.
Well, it's a different kind of effort, right? Like, I think there is something consistent about Cube designers being interested in game design or systems or just Magic as a mechanical exploration in different kinds of math and whatever. Like, there's some kind of person...
We're a bunch of nerds, is what you're saying.
There's a certain type of person that Cube design appeals to, and that set of interests and skills is totally different from, basically, hosting an event or community building. It's a whole different set of skills, but it is obviously very related to the thing we love, because if you don't get to play your Cube... I mean, there's some people out there, I'm sure, that mostly just, bot draft their Cube or look at lists, and that's valid.
Just collect foils and
just
enjoy looking at them. That's all good.
But I personally really enjoy playing Magic, and I would like to play my Cube as much as possible, so I think a lot of people are in that boat. I think there's a very simple TLDR here. If people don't want to listen to the entire episode, we can just say, be consistent. Pick a location, pick a time, and have consistent expectations, and just show up, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the number one thing that I wrote down. I mean, you mentioned that I've been making an effort to start our local play group, and really the situation was after the beginning of the pandemic, not to say it has ended yet.
We could say after lockdowns.
Yeah. Our play group definitely changed. People left town or left the game or whatever, so it really did take some work to restart it. And specifically, our interest in Cube had grown, so I really wanted to make that a recurring event. And we had tried a little bit. We tried on, a night that there was also Commander, thinking we'll sort of get people engaged, and people just don't want to not give up their Commander night. So yeah, we just made a concerted effort to say, I'm going to be there every Tuesday night at our local game store. I will have a Cube with me. Anybody show up. And that really did take a long time to work, to be honest.
I mean, not as long as I expected, to be frank.
Okay, I'll take that. But, after a couple months, that consistency really paid off because people started showing up like, yeah, I've been hearing about there's this Tuesday night Cube night and I haven't been able to make it for 3 months, but I just have a free Tuesday. So that consistency really has been critical and really paid off.
I think most people listening to this show will know that Cube is great. If you can get people there the first time, they are very likely to be hooked to some degree. We've seen that happen a lot of times where someone showed up for one Cube draft and then was like, yo, this rules. Mm-hmm. Like, this is what I want to do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, literally the first Cube draft, like somebody drafted, I was unfortunately home for Christmas, but you had somebody else play with you last week, and they were like, immediately, we got to do this again. So we did a bonus extra Cube.
Yes, they did it on Friday. We did it on the normal Tuesday, and then they were like, can we Cube again? And we did it on Friday, and now this person, I hope, is going to be a regular member of the drafting crew.
Which is great. So all that to say, I think that really the key is consistency. And I mean, I think that pays off in a lot of ways. One of the ways is just that people can count on it. They know it's there. They get used to it, and they get used to the cycle of it and it being present. It also just makes it really easy to communicate about it and tell people about it. If it's like, well, there's signups and it's like the third Tuesday of every month.
Get on this Discord server, follow this channel, see when someone posts their drafting their cube, hopefully be one of the first day people to respond. That's a big ask for people.
It just makes a very clear, simple message that people can understand. So, number one, consistency. Is there anything else to talk about? I feel like that's really the biggest thing.
Well, I think there's details about what to be consistent about. So I think the biggest sticking point for most people is going to be a location to do this.
Definitely.
I think the ideal spot is hopefully your local game store. This is not without complexity, though. So we're really lucky. Our local game store is owned by some friends. It was actually started because of a big play group we had sort of drummed up in a neighborhood where we were just like playing in our office every week, and there was enough people there that these guys were like, let's just start a game store. Maybe we can support one in this neighborhood. So we have like a long history with the people that own this shop, and we're good friends with them. And so there was no question that like we would be welcome. We could have a cube night and it wouldn't be weird or at all. They also have a lot of space. It's a game store with a ton of tables. There's very rarely a limit to the number of things they can have going on because there's just not enough table space. And it's also a bar, which means that they are maybe a little more willing to have otherwise unpaying people in the space, because if you're in a space for long enough, you're going to eventually buy a drink or you're going to buy a pizza at the bar or whatever. And so I think maybe all those factors mean that our local game store is very happy to have us, as far as I can tell. I mean, they've never said anything negative to me. I don't know about you.
Totally. I mean, it's definitely going to change a lot depending on your local game store, which, a lot of people might not even have. But if you are fortunate enough to have that and they have space, it's just like any other casual, unsanctioned gameplay. They already have a commander night where people are just there. There's no prize support or anything. It's just casual games. We're doing the same thing, just playing games. And yeah, hopefully everybody buys a couple of drinks.
I do think the popularity of Commander really helps us in this regard. I mean, if you went back, I don't know, 6 years, 8 years to your average local game store, there wasn't a Commander night. It wasn't a thing that everyone was playing all the time. And so most of the play that happened in the store, I think, was sanctioned F&M, where like the store was running a draft. The store was running a standard event or whatever, which sounds like there are so few stores doing that anymore. It's like a whole different world. But I really do think that the fact that there is this established precedent for a bunch of people being in the shop to play, not in a WPN sanctioned, organized event with buy-in and prize support, I think largely helps the sort of Cube community because there's some precedent set for us. Now, I will say I know for a fact that a lot of local game store owners have a mixed relationship at best with the Commander night, because a lot of people will come in, use the space, they don't buy anything, they just, come in, make a mess, play with their friends, and take up space, flush the toilet a bunch of times, and then leave. And
I mean, flushing the toilet might be better than the alternative.
I'm just saying. I mean, they're
consuming resources.
They're consuming resources. Yeah. The space requires upkeep. They have the lights on. They're using things that cost the store. The store has to pay money to exist, right? And we've had both positive and medium to negative sort of interactions with game store owners over the years, and we're lucky now that we have again these friends that run this game shop that we're very close to. I guess what it comes down to is I think inside every local game store owner, there are two wolves. And one wolf is a person that probably loves Magic or another game like Magic, probably wants to help a community space exist in their neighborhood or in their city where people can come and play games, is like in it for all the right reasons. And the other wolf is somebody that is running a for-profit business, and there are forces on running a for-profit business that make it hard to do the thing that you want to do or the thing you think is right or whatever.
So are you suggesting those are the wrong reasons?
Yeah, I mean...
Okay.
I mean, I am. I think that it would be great if we lived in some sort of, utopian future where people didn't have to worry about making ends meet and getting health insurance and whatever, and we could just dedicate our time to... I'm just going to focus on making this community space. Most people don't have that luxury. Most shops, I mean, they're a for-profit business, and a for-profit business is never your friend. It might be run by your friends, and your friends might be people that you like and trust at the helm, but the business motivations are never your friend. And so there's going to be an inherent tension, I think, if you are going to want to come into a space and play Cube or Commander or whatever it is in an unsanctioned way that doesn't necessitate anybody paying to be there. And there's really no one solution for this problem. I think you have to talk to your local game store owner. I know a lot of our friends in New York, for example, said that, in New York, real estate is extremely expensive. Space is very much at a premium. And so basically every game store there just has a table rental fee. If you want to sit down to play any game, you got to pay them, which is very out of place in a place like Baltimore. I'm sure it's not something you'd ever see in like more rural or like suburban areas where space is not at a premium, but that's just the reality of living in New York or, LA or wherever this sort of space is really expensive.
Yeah, and in a way, I do kind of appreciate the straightforwardness of that. There's not like, oh, are you answering like it's fine if we play because you're a friend or because it's in the interest of your business. It's just like, no, this is the cost, and everybody's going to pay their $10 to play the Cube Night. But I mean, I think the most important thing in that is just communication. Just if you do have a local game store and you're interested in starting up a Cube Night, talk to them, see if that works for them. If there's a drink minimum or there's just a table fee that everybody has to pay, or maybe you have to buy into prize support, and that the cost of buying a bunch of packs for prize support makes it worthwhile to the game store. Just talk to them and figure out what's going to make it worthwhile to them.
Yeah, and I think approaching that with an open mind and just being like, hey, this is something I'm interested in. What would it take for you to be excited about this? Or, asking the question in a way that gives them all different ways they could possibly respond. I actually posted this question on Twitter and on the subreddit to try and get input from other local game store owners. And I wished it wasn't true, but I asked the question, what would it take to get you as a local game store owner to be excited about or endorse or support an effort to have a Cube Night? And a lot of the responses were people not really answering that question, but explaining all the reasons why they wouldn't want to do that, which is, I think, the feedback some people are going to run into. They're going to mention this to their local game store owner, and their game store is going to go, well, that's great. I mean, who's going to be paying for it? Or how am I supposed to keep the lights on or pay the rent if you're just going to be sitting here using up all my resources?
Yeah, so I think going into
that second wolf, right?
Right. I think going into that conversation, just being clear about what the expectations are. If you're saying, I'm going to provide the cube, I'm bringing the people, it doesn't take anything other than, seats and lights and employees. It does take a lot from you.
Which is something, yeah.
But it doesn't take organization from you. Then just be clear and upfront about that, and hopefully you can figure out something that makes sense.
And I heard a couple of interesting ideas, either from shop owners or just other players that have organized their own Cube play groups in local areas. You mentioned having prize support. I heard from a number of people that basically have a buy-in that then pays out in store credit. So it's $5 for a seat, and whoever wins the Cube draft gets, $40 in store credit. Maybe you break it up among the top two or whatever. And so that's a way that you can very simply have prize support that I'm sure most stores would be happy to support. Somebody also said that they seed their cube so that everybody has one booster tutor in their pool, basically, and they errata booster tutor to not be a black card, but just be a generic mana card. And then they require that the people actually buy a booster pack. So here's a powerful card, but if you want to do it, you have to actually buy a booster. We're not pulling cards from the rest of the cube.
That's kind of funny. I love that.
I think it's kind of cute. I think it works really interestingly. Also, little things like just offering to clean up, like making sure the shop owner knows that you're aware that your presence in the space does create work. I mean, we hosted a Commander Night / Magic Night at our office for many years, and even your close friends that know that you're in your personal office leave behind a huge mess every week. We had so much cleaning up to do. I was surprised by it. So obviously in a local game store where they don't necessarily know the owners and they're not their friends and they feel like they're in a public space, people behave very differently in a public space than a private space, and they'll just leave, they spill some beer or whatever and just let it dry on the table and just leave it there and don't clean it up, or, whatever they do. There's going to be a mess. And so acknowledging to the store owner that, I'm aware that's going to happen and I'm going to clean it up, I think goes a long way also to just making clear that you're like a good faith participant in the space.
Absolutely. So I think that an LGS is really the ideal space because, there's a lot of other magic likely happening. There's, access to resources. You need some basic lands. You need to buy packs for your booster tutor, whatever.
Extra playmats. I mean, our store has a big stack of store playmats, and most weeks, and I think Cube especially, people are more likely to show up without a playmat than if they're also bringing their decks or something. If they have their magic bag that has their decks and their playmats and dice in it, then they'll bring those to Commander Night. But if you're just come out to play Cube, you don't need anything, then people oftentimes show up without a playmat. So even just that is a great resource to have. And
it's just, central, and you might be there other nights of the week. So a local game store is great, but it's not necessarily the only option. I think that it's a little bit more difficult because if you're trying to do the consistency thing and have it every single week, it's maybe a little bit more of a burden to be doing it at your personal house, but that's definitely an option.
Well, hold on. Before we go to more spots, I have other things on the local game store. I think one other thing people should be aware of is just be very conscious of the hours of the shop. A lot of places don't necessarily have regular hours. They're just open for events. So on Friday, they have their F&M hours, and maybe they have their Commander Night hours. And so being conscious of that and making sure that you don't overstay your welcome and that you plan to end your draft 20 minutes before the store closes or 30 minutes before the store closes so that you can be out of there and not be sort of lagging behind, I think is another thing that's really important. That's all stuff that you can do as the Cube owner, like time rounds, make sure you start on time, like all this kind of stuff really does, I think, help your presence in the shop. You mentioned, Anthony, all the benefits of being in the local game store. I don't think it can be overstated that being in a space where Magic already happens is huge for growing your playgroup because people are just going to be walking by. They're going to be playing Commander one table over and say, hey, what are you doing over there? And you're just part of the Magic community if you're doing it in that space, and that's why being in a local game store, I think, has so much value over any other space.
Absolutely.
Because, again, your goal here is not just to have a place to play Cube every week, but to find more people interested in this format and grow the playgroup. So you can regularly fire full pods, you get more people designing cubes. I mean, how many cubes do we have in our playgroup now? It's like truly out of control. But that's what you want, right? I think that's what you want if you're listening to this episode. That's what we wanted, and I think you've done a great job of making that happen. So that's why the game store is so important, because you are actually part of the Magic community, and we don't play constructed formats much. We rarely go to Commander Night, and when we do, it's usually on kind of a ambassadorial mission to try and get people to maybe play Cube. Like, hey, I notice you're salting off about that Cyclonic Rift, or that person that took 9 turns in a row. Can I tell you about
I see your
Cube?
Commander just got banned. Would you like to try Cube,
Yeah.
where you can play your Commander?
But even though we're not playing those formats, we still are part of the... We go to pre-releases there, right? And play against people, and I'll always, at pre-release, be like, what other kinds of Magic do you play? And they'll say Commander, always, and nothing else. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they say Arena. Maybe they're really into Arena. Those are the two answers I often get. And then they ask me the same question, and I said, well, I'm into Cube. And they say, what is Cube? And these conversations are how you, over time, start to grow the playgroup. And it really is, I think, it's a long game. Like you said, people will hear about it in passing for the first 4 times, and the 5th time they hear about it, they'll say, okay, I mean, I keep hearing about this, like, what actually is it? You know, how do I actually participate? How do I give it a shot? And that's how you have to kind of commit to make this thing happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you can't do it at your local game store, and honestly, I would say that if you do talk to a local game store owner and you are met with a bunch of negative energy and they don't seem enthusiastic about it, then I honestly, if I was in a city where I didn't have a local game store owner that I liked or a spot that I trusted, I would probably like not try and work uphill to fight against an owner that didn't really want us there or that didn't really have space. I'd probably find an alternative. So if that's the case, if you are met with some kind of like pushback, then I think the next best thing to look for is any other public space for a lot of reasons. I mean, obviously having strangers or near strangers in your home is fraught in a lot of ways, but also it's much easier to have a like recurring, regular scheduled event at a public space. I mean, you started this, but there have been, 4 nights maybe over the past 12 months where like you weren't there for whatever reason.
I'm going to say like 2.
Whatever. There was some. There was some where you were out of town or whatever, you got sick, and we could still do it, right? We didn't, because we weren't going to your house. We were still in public, so people still showed up and did the thing that you ostensibly started. And that's the dream, right? You get the ball rolling, and then it sort of keeps going. That's really only possible in a public space. I mean, you could maybe, if people really get to know each other, maybe someone else steps up to host if you can't for whatever reason. But I think that's another big value of that. And also the thing about public spaces is that people are more comfortable coming to them. Like, as uncomfortable as you might be inviting a total stranger to your home, it's equally uncomfortable for somebody else to be like, I'm just going to someone's house. I hope it's not a mess, or they don't have a dog that doesn't like me, or like all the sort of various anxieties you can have about going to a stranger's home to do something. So other public spaces, I have heard people organize cube groups in. Public libraries are great. If you have a public library,
they still exist. Some places.
They still exist, and they are free and open to the public. That's kind of their whole thing.
And I think in a lot of ways, a lot of public libraries are really just community spaces before anything else.
Yes,
I feel
especially
like
now.
Our local branches, they have less books, which is a weird thing to say, but they really do have less books and more just like open space and, stuff, places where communities can gather.
Right. It's for events and for, stuff like that. I've also heard a lot of people playing in breweries. I think breweries tend to have a lot of space because they tend to be in like old warehouses or industrial areas where space is not the limiting factor. Maybe it's a little cold because it's unheated or something, but breweries, I've heard of a lot of people having success there. Bars and cafes are also an option. There, I think you're getting into the space of like, you need to figure out how you're going to have a good relationship with a bar or cafe you're regularly playing at. Do you make sure that you always get food or you always get X number of drinks? Because if you are in a place that is making money directly off of their square footage, then that's a consideration for you to have. But depending on your local circumstances, I think all of these are good options for also hosting a regular Cube Night or Magic Night.
Yeah, I mean, as far as cafes and restaurants, it's really going to vary on the place. I think breweries is a great call out because they often do have long tables and expect people to linger for a fair amount of time. And, maybe they've even got like party games and stuff like that. So
yeah,
it kind of fits naturally. Again, always helps just to communicate and talk to the owner or manager there. And there are definitely going to be a spectrum of some restaurants and cafes that are more close to that and will have that kind of accommodating space. And a lot that won't. So, just read the room.
Yeah. And then as you were getting at earlier, all else fails. Presumably you live somewhere, listener. You could host a draft at your home, your apartment, wherever you live. That can be different amounts of difficult depending on your living circumstances. Just the fact of having a table big enough for 8 people is a luxury that a lot of people don't have. We bought a really nice folding table that we have for running drafts on when we have to do it somewhere where there's not a big enough table. And so that's an option. It's like $80 for a pretty darn nice folding table. We got an 8-foot one, a really long one that's big enough to fit all the players and 4 play mats across each side. And so that can really help. Obviously, if you have roommates or people you live with, making sure you communicate with them about expectations.
Make sure you get them into Cube. That's an important step.
That's obviously very important. What are the tips? I mean, you've hosted probably the most Cube events in your home. What other tips do you have just for hosting people in your house?
Great question. So I've really enjoyed just having giant play mats. This is maybe a little bit of a detail thing, but I just got a couple, what are they, 32 by 32 play mats.
Maybe even bigger. Maybe they're 36 by 36.
And it just works out well that 2 of them fill up my table. If I have no leaves in, I can put the leaves in, put 3 of them out, and just having one big open expansive play space and a couple bowls of dice just makes everything run really smoothly. I always let people know, come early if you want. I'll just be there playing
living
some
in my home
box or something, living in my
live.
house. And again, I think just having that little bit of flexibility so that you can start on time is pretty critical. And let people know, again, about expectations if you want people to bring something, or if they need to bring, dice and playmats with them, or you want help shuffling beforehand. Again, it's all about just communication and making sure you set expectations about how you want people to treat your home.
And we did an episode a while back that was at least tangential to this topic, which was about just, how to get people to play your cube, which is kind of different than establishing a culture and a community of a play group. But in that, we talked a lot about how if you're hosting a cube draft, provide food. Think about the fact that you're hosting an event, right? Again, you think about this not from the perspective of a cube designer, but from someone that's throwing a party. Would you throw a party at anything near a mealtime and have no food to eat? You probably would never do that. And this should not be that different. So think about having food, even if you don't have to be like Anthony and making beautiful food from scratch for everybody in huge quantities. You can just order pizza. You can get, takeout or whatever. That's also totally fine. Having a little cheese board, whatever you're into, that I think goes a long way to making people feel welcome and also just meeting their biological needs while they're committing to something for 4-ish hours.
Yeah, that's a really great point, is that a cube draft does take a long time, and that makes it a little bit difficult to fit into people's schedules. So just being mindful of that, whether that means, finding the right time where it is not intersecting with a meal time and maybe just taking that option away from people is pretty important.
I remember back when we were doing more Magic in person at other game stores, you would always be so mad. You're why does everybody schedule all Magic things as if meals don't exist?
It's insane.
They're we're starting at 11:30. What are you doing? So yeah, being aware of all that stuff I think is important. And then all the regular stuff that goes along with hosting, make your home or apartment clean, make sure you have extra toilet paper in the bathroom, all that kind of stuff. We can't hold your hand too much, but just acknowledge you're going to have people in your house. Think of it like an event, like a little party. Have we covered the location aspect in enough detail, you think, Anthony?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it is one of the more difficult places. If you're listening to this, you probably already have your cube you're excited about. Finding people is a big challenge, and then I think location is just the next biggest one.
I think it is the biggest challenge. It's also probably the thing that is going to vary most depending on your specific circumstances.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
So our advice can only be so directed. The biggest thing is picking a place and being at that place consistently. I really think that if you are trying to move it around every week and someone different hosts, or you're bouncing around to different bars because you don't want to bother one bar every single week because they'll get tired of you, that becomes so much harder for people to latch onto and to make a ritual out of, which is what you're trying to do. You're trying to establish a set of expectations that will allow people to show up whenever they want and just not show up when they don't want to show up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that can work too, especially if you have sort of an online component to the community and you're organizing things in discrete spaces. We're not saying that can't work, but we're just talking about the specific strategy of cultivating a group that really centers around consistency.
Yeah. Specifically, if you're trying to grow your group, these are the things you need to do. If you already have a group that's doing your own thing and you do have a Discord, you are hosting at different people's houses, then great. This doesn't apply to you. If you're trying to get more players in, or you're trying to make a group where one doesn't exist, these are the things you need to be conscious of.
Do it!
I think the next thing is choosing a time. Like, again, the things to be consistent about are location and time. This one's a little simpler. Like, I think asking anybody that you are playing with, hopefully it's literally not just you and you're trying to lone wolf style start a whole cube thing. Hopefully you have one other friend you play with or another person that's interested or a couple people that are interested. Talk to them about what works for them. Don't just kind of sit in your own ivory tower and decide what everything's going to be and then hope it works in people's schedules. Figure out what people can do. So for us, we start later than I would like to on weeknights for our cube night, but that's because people work until later than I work and they can't get there earlier. And so if the options are start at the time I want to start, but half the people can't be there, then that's obviously not as preferred as me staying up a little later than maybe I want, but getting to play with more people and actually growing the group.
And some people need to eat a meal after work. That's also a really important part of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that, obviously there's time of day which you need to be cognizant of, what people's work schedules are going to be like and what people's meal schedules are going to be like. There's also time of the week or, month or whatever kind of schedule you're working with. Again, talk to people, if you are in some public space, talk to the people that are running the space. I think something that was really important to our group was not overlapping with some of the other Magic events because people were just really unwilling to give up their Commander night, whereas
I think when someone has a Commander deck on them and there's Commander happening, it's really hard to get them to take that leap. Whereas if they've come out specifically to do something different, then it's not as big of an ask. Both of our initial impressions was like, let's be there doing this while other Magic is going on, so people will see us and walk by or whatever. And the reality was that maybe they did, but they weren't interested. They were interested in whatever they were doing.
Right.
This is also something I got mixed feedback on from LGS owners. Some said explicitly, don't compete with my events, do this on another night so that you're not, overlapping with stuff I'm trying to organize. And some said, do specifically do it at the same time as another event because that's when I have staff there to make sure the space is operating, and I don't want to have to think about staffing a night where people aren't playing Magic. So talk to your local game store or whatever space you're going to be hosting this. And again, we're going to be consistent about telling you to be consistent. Pick a time and stick to it. The draft fires at 6:30 in Baltimore at No Land Beyond on Tuesdays.
Oh yeah, by the way, that's when that happens, so show up.
Yeah, I mean, if you're out there, No Land Beyond, 6:30 on Tuesdays is when we fire the drafts. So if you're there at 6:45, you probably missed it. If you're there at 5:30, be prepared to wait for an hour because we're not going to fire it any time earlier.
This actually came up recently in the CubeCon Discord, and I feel like a dozen people all said Tuesday nights was their Cube night, and no one said anything else. So I would, if you don't have any other influences, I would just say Tuesday night.
Is that because of Cube's Day?
No, that would be silly. I think it might just be that there are a lot of, maybe it's just there are Magic events stacked up in every other night of the week, and then Tuesday happened to be the next one for Cube to fall. That's my best hypothesis.
Yeah, I mean, for our local game store, I think it was the least popular night. I mean, our store's not open on Mondays, or wasn't for a long time. And for a while, they weren't open on Tuesdays either. They changed their hours basically when things started opening up again, and we're like, I guess we'll open on Tuesdays, but there wasn't anything in that slot. And so we were like, well, we'll show up on Tuesdays for the first time you start opening on that day. So yeah, this is another thing you got to figure out based on your local group, but we just have to emphasize that picking a time, picking a location, and just being there and making it happen is what's really important.
Just do it!
I think the next big component is just how do you find people and get them interested in and integrated into the group.
That's what I put on my notes too, in the exact same order.
Perfect. So there's a couple different aspects to this. I think that one of the biggest ones is just like we're saying, being in a public space, being at a game store just gives you a lot of visibility. People are going to see you playing, maybe they're not there for Commander Night, but they're just showing up to buy a couple singles or pick something up.
And your game store is almost certainly a hub for a Magic community, right? Whether it's a Commander group or maybe your area is big on Legacy or whatever. That's the most likely spot where there's going to be an existing community of people that know each other, like playing with each other, and where you can start to have this kind of viral nature of kind of spreading the idea of Cube through the group.
Absolutely. And then I think beyond that, just showing up to other events and evangelizing for your Cube night a little bit. And that's, I think, again, where the consistency comes in really importantly, because when you mention at your pre-release or you go to the occasional Commander night and you say, hey, we do Cubes this day, this time, again, that's a simple message you can communicate, and they don't need to learn more or find a Discord or figure out, how to join the Facebook group or whatever it is. They just get the whole message in that one line.
Yeah, and I would say be conscious of your evangelizing. I think...
oh, really? You don't want to just be really in your face and tell everybody, why are you playing Commander? This sucks. You should play Cube.
I think it goes without saying you shouldn't be doing that. I make an effort to never, bring it up myself, right? Again, I'll always ask the question to someone I'm playing with new or playing with for the second time or whatever, what other Magic do you play? I think that's the most relatable question, because I don't want to talk about work. I assume people I'm talking to don't want to talk about work. So what do we have in common? We play this game. What other kinds of this game do you play other than this pre-release event we're playing? And that almost always leads to a very natural question of like, what do you play? And I say Cube. And most people say, what is that? And then they're curious, right? They ask the question. I didn't like come with a megaphone and start telling them that this is the best format ever.
Yeah, absolutely. Be an adult and have an adult conversation, and it'll work, right?
Yeah, and I just think that I think there's something maybe a little fraud about the idea of going to an event specifically to evangelize. Like, you should want to be there to play whatever the event is. You shouldn't be there begrudgingly because, this is the only way to find someone to play the Magic you actually want to play. If you really are not going to have fun at pre-release and you are going just because you want to, like, convince people to play your cube, then that's probably not the best strategy. But if you're like us, Commander might not be your favorite or, whatever, but you're still happy to play. It's still fun to go play Magic and be with people and see your friends. And so just be there for the right reasons, right? I guess is what it comes down to.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, pre-release is still one of the best ways to play Magic.
Pre-release is still fantastic, especially when they actually do pre-release before the arena release.
Oh, yeah,
did a couple times this past year.
I think another aspect of this is what we've touched on a little bit of having some kind of online component. Even though the consistency is super valuable and shortcuts a lot of the need for a lot of planning and organization, it's still super helpful just to have a way to communicate with people if there are exceptions or if people are just curious but not really ready to come to their first night without having a little bit more information. Having some way to reach out to the community is super valuable.
Also, a lot of people think about Magic more than they have time to play it and can be active, vibrant members of the community, even if they can't come out and play that often.
That's true. It just sort of keeps people engaged through the weeks that they're not able to come out to it.
I mean, there are people in our Discord that some of the most active members of our local playgroups Discord never come out because they work or they, have responsibilities at home or whatever. So that is another valid way to have a community, and it does really help to have just another connection point, right? Once someone does come to their first cube draft, you can be like, hey, we post deck picks in this Discord. Do you want to join it? And, again, don't push it too hard, but have that be available so people that do want to get more invested can get more invested.
Totally. And it is a great place to put resources like you're describing, having pictures of previous decks, having just the lists of cubes.
Yep, pinned to a channel.
I actually just put all of the local cubes into one Google Doc, and then we have that pinned. So if somebody's asking, oh, what was that cube I heard about that was, had this weird restriction, it's there and they can find it.
Yep, I think that's really valuable. And that's honestly what, I don't know if it's bleak or optimistic to say, but things like a Discord server, that's what community is in 2022 largely. We don't have the same kind of public space communities that we had 50 years ago. And so that's the form that a lot of these communities around a specific topic are going to take, is some kind of Discord. It could be a WhatsApp group. It could be a text message thread. It could be a Facebook group. Whatever your preferred means of communication or whatever is popular amongst your friends or these people is what you should use. But whatever it is, that's how a lot of friend groups organize and stay in touch with each other. I think the last thing for finding players is maybe kind of obvious, but is worth saying. Be a good steward of Cube. Be welcoming. Try not to intimidate people or make it sound really difficult or, have too high stakes and be super competitive so people feel bad if they lose or whatever. Cube is difficult. It's a really complicated format, especially a cube you've never drafted before. I always kind of tell people, if you want to get into this, you're going to lose a little bit up front. You're not going to show up and start 3-hour drafts immediately. So being just very welcoming and understanding that people are coming from different spots and places and trying to make the overall experience pleasant rather than just, I designed a cube, I'm going to show up and draft it, and whatever happens to you, I don't care about, I think goes a long way just to be a good representative of the format.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, just being enthusiastic and sharing other people's excitement when somebody gets their first 2-1 or for their first 3-0, don't salt off and say, oh, well, I just lost because somebody hated this pick for me.
I'm all to 4, so that's why you won. Yeah, that's not good.
That's not great. But yeah, be excited for people as they are learning and growing more in this great format.
I always try and make an effort, specifically when we're drafting one of my cubes, if there's someone that hasn't drafted it before, to afterwards ask them about their pool. How was this? Was this cool? What was the most fun you had? Just engage with them a little bit and try and share that excitement. It probably went 1-2 or 0-3 if it's their first time drafting a cube. Just that's probably how it went. So trying to figure out what they did have fun with, what was exciting to them, and focus on that and just have a little conversation about it, I think goes a long way.
I think that also goes a long way to making it not feel like you're the cube owner, you're the cube master, you understand everything about it. When you're asking questions, it's yeah, we're all learning about this environment together and you have valuable contributions, even though it's just your first time, because our learning of this experience is not linear.
Right. And it's not I play the cube correctly and you play it incorrectly.
Right.
The ways we play the cube are both equally valid, and so learning what your experience was is important.
So great for you just as a cube designer, if that's the position you're in, but also really does a lot to make your players feel welcome.
Yeah. The other thing I would say about finding people is just there probably are extant groups like Discord servers, Facebook groups, whatever, in your local area, and trying to find those. And again, just like showing up to FNM or pre-release or Commander Night, like show up for the right reasons. Don't just pop in there and have your first message be, "Hey, everyone, come play my cube." Like, become a member of the community. Yeah, become a member of the community. Like, make an effort to find out what they're interested in, and maybe they're really into Canadian Highlander or something, and like borrow a deck and play whatever they're playing. Don't just approach this with the perspective of all I'm trying to do is grow my cube group, everything else is irrelevant to me, because all kinds of Magic are great, and importantly, you're trying to also just make friends. And I think when you play a bunch of Magic with people, they will eventually agree that cube is the best, and they'll get there, but hopefully they'll do that without you having to like proselytize it. That'll just happen because they will also come to love it for the same reasons you love it.
Make your dreams come true!
So sort of adjacent to time, location, consistency, we also do a fair number of events beyond the weekly night. You know, somebody will host at their house, we'll do a dinner party, we'll do an impromptu Friday night draft. How important do you think those like extra events are to building the community?
I don't know if they're important to building the community, but I think they're a good litmus test for the health of the community, right? Like the fact that now, like Patrick, who's been on the show before and been on the stream, like he organized Friday Night's Draft. He was like, "Hey, it's Thursday. Tomorrow, I'm getting off work at 7. Who wants to play Cube?" You or I didn't have any role in that. I mean, we showed up and played, but like we didn't organize that. We didn't pick a location. Like Patrick was like, "I'm making it happen." That is great. It's great that we have people like Patrick that are just as invested in the community. And Patrick doesn't even have a cube yet. Like Patrick just wants to play Cube and is like, "Come on, someone bring a cube. I want to draft." So it's a really positive sign, I think, when there are other things that are happening outside of the regularly scheduled event, but I don't know if those are important necessarily to making that group in the first place or growing it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just do it!
My next list of things here is just like tips once you've done all these other things to like just be successful. So I'm going to say it again, be consistent. I cannot overstate how important it is that you just pick a thing and show up. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard because like some weeks the store is going to be closed on your night, or you're going to have people that are going to say, "I wish I could show up at this time, but I can't. I have another time it's available for me." And you can't just keep moving it around to try and meet everybody's needs. You kind of got to like do your best to pick a time that works for the most people and just show up. Or the couple people in our playgroup, they can never make Tuesdays. And it's a bummer. Like, I'm sad about it. I wish we could play more with Ankith, but that's one of the few people that can't play on Tuesday nights where most people can. And so it sucks, but it's like, we can't just move this around every week to try and let everybody get a hand on the ball, because if we do that, we break this ritual and this habit, and we don't have this thing we can refer to anymore as the Tuesday night Cube night we can tell people about. So really, that consistency is absolutely the most important thing. Something that you insisted on when we started doing this, which I disagreed with at first, was you were like, we are not going to have signups, we are not going to have commitments, like we are just going to have people show up and whoever's there is going to draft. And I'm an organizer, maybe an over-organizer, and I was like, no, let's get people to tell us if they're going to come. Let's like, if someone commits, let's make sure they have a spot in the pod for the cube they want. Let's like figure out how many cubes we have to bring out. I was trying to like overwork it. And in hindsight, you were totally right. People, first of all, don't want to commit. It's like intimidating to commit to a thing. You would much rather just say, I got off work and I feel good. I'm not exhausted. Let's go to cube night. I decided an hour before it's going to happen. Right. So I think that is actually a huge part of it, is like, don't have commitments. Just be like, I'm going to be there. I'm going to have a cube. Whoever shows up, we're going to draft. I think that's huge.
Yeah, I'm really happy with how that worked out. I mean, because we tried to start up the Cube Night a couple other times, and we had some other challenges, and one of them was just getting, like, having an event where you need exactly 8 people is a little bit challenging, and I think we'll talk about some of the ways to mitigate that as well. But just having the no commitment really has worked out well. But that only works because of the consistency, because we say, hey, we're going to fire at 6:30 with whoever's there. It means that we're not like, oh, well, somebody mentioned they might be showing up, so let's give it another 10 minutes. We just have a clear sort of guideline there. It also makes all the other things we've talked about, like having the Discord, all opt-in, because people don't need to be in the Discord to sign up if they don't want to.
Or that was the thing we experienced, is like, I was running events where I was requiring signups, and it was like, well, the people that always make the pod are the ones that are most active on Discord. And the people that check it every 3 days are like, I missed it again. Sucks.
Or, those of us who are lucky enough to work cushy jobs and sit in front of a computer all day can respond and make the first 8 signups and make sure we're in the pod, whereas the people who are
working a service job or whatever and not working in front of a computer all day
just can't be there at the right time. So making it not first come, first serve was also, I think, really valuable.
Yeah, so that was, I think, huge and something I would definitely recommend. And it might be intimidating to be like, well, I don't know how many people are going to be there or like what's going to happen, but you just got to like commit to the bit.
And the reality in our experience was the first month and a half, maybe 2 months, we had a lot of 3 to 5 player nights. And it's like, okay, we got 3 players. We can do a weird grid draft, and then we'll just do a little round robin, or we'll do a 5-player draft, and people are going to get the bye. And that paid off in the end, but it was a lot of like less than optimal cube drafts to get there and build that community.
That's a big thing. I think what to do when you have weird numbers of people or non-optimal numbers of people is a huge thing to answer, and you should know different ways you can draft a cube with really any number of people. Obviously, cubes are going to have a max limit, however many cards they have in the cube divided by pool size. That's how many people you can actually support. But knowing what to do when there's 5 people or what to do when there's 7 people or 3 people, I think is important. And as the cube owner, if that's who you are listening, like, have a plan. Like, don't be like, 5 people, what do we do? And in a lot of cases, like if there's 5 people, I'm happy to be like, I'm the cube host, I'll sit this one out, right? And
Totally.
I'm invested in the long game. I will miss one night of playing cube to instead make this a good experience for the people that did show up, so they'll come back again, and this can kind of grow. We also, on our website, we have a page of all different kinds of draft formats that are suited for all different numbers of people. So there are formats that can work for every group size. I think the most cursed numbers are like 7, where it's like you're going to do a regular draft, but someone's just going to have a bye, and buys aren't that fun. Or like really low numbers like 3. I think in that case, you can actually probably just do either a grid or burn draft variant with 3 people, and then just take turns having the bye and just play, your 2 matches or whatever and see how it goes.
I mean, this is another case where being at an LGS really does pay off, because you have the bye, but you can go check out the board games or flip through singles, or, there's other
Go
activities
get your bar pizza.
to go eat your bar pizza, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, be prepared for that. I think we can do a whole separate episode just about ways to play with different groups, but I think that, like you said, having a plan is really important. And sometimes that does mean sort of sacrificing yourself and being the one to say like, okay, we got 9 people, I'm just going to chill and host and organize, and that's it.
Which I don't know what you listener might really not be into that, but I think it's kind of fun sometimes. Like,
especially if it's your cube, just watching people play it, that's kind of fun.
You can learn a lot from... You learn one set of things from talking to someone after a draft. You learn a totally different set of things by watching people play in a match that you would never learn from asking them, because there are things they never think to say or whatever. You're looking for things you didn't know to ask about. Yeah,
so just to state it clearly, our strategy has been we're just going to fire at 6:30 with whoever we have there, and we're going to make pods however it makes sense. So if we have 12 people, we'll probably split into 2 6 pods. If we can do more math here, 10 people, maybe we hopefully have a cube that can support a 10-person draft or come up with some configuration.
Full pod, and then somebody else, is doing some other kind of magic.
So we also have generally, like, I keep my battle box on me pretty much every cube night. You have some starter decks.
Stay strapped with that battle box.
Absolutely. Just because, again, we talked about people showing up early is nice, so we can make sure to, like, start doing that preparation, figure out how we want to split up pods so we can start making packs and stuff like that, because we might want to do different pack sizes for different pod sizes, things like that. And having a battle box, you can play some casual games just to make showing up early not just a loss is super valuable.
And I'll go a step further. I think it's really important to not fall back on Commander or some other kind of magic.
Ooh, wow.
I think it's really important to have ways that people can show up without cards and play no matter what. And
that's a good point.
Battle box
showing up without cards is important.
Yeah, like battle boxes are a great example of like a very easy way for 2 people to play very quickly, no real investment or time involved. You just start playing. I have these 5 starter decks I built, which I am always happy to play with people and like learn from their experience playing. Overall, the experience you're creating is you show up and we are going to play fun Magic every week. And most of the time it's going to be Cube Draft, but sometimes for whatever reason you're going to be doing something else, or we'll have to break up into weird groups. And I think it's really important to like have a thing to do for everybody that shows up involving Magic cards. Because as soon as you start falling back to Commander or, whatever, then that's when you start to lose people, I think. And they're like, oh, well, do I really want to do this, or do I really actually want to play my Commander decks because I brought my cards? People have their own cards in their hands. It's like a whole different thing. The other thing is, I'm really proud of the fact that we've been able to get people really invested in our Cube community that don't really own Magic cards. They're not invested in the game in that sense. Maybe they can't afford to like have a Commander deck that's competitive with what's going on in the local meta, and they're just very happy to show up and be able to play with someone else's cards. I think that's beautiful and great. One of the best things about Cube. So that's my other tip about this, is just have something for people to play so they can show up without cards, and emphasize that. Be like, even if you did bring your Commander decks, like, we're playing Battle Box tonight, so that's what we're going to do. Like, try and, establish the fact that this is going to be a non-constructed event. People are going to show up and play with whatever cards are there and whatever formats are laid out for them.
Yeah, and this has come up a couple times where we've met somebody at, the local beer garden or, in the game shop, but they're playing board games, and they see people playing Magic. It's like, oh yeah, I used to play that when I was a kid. And it's like, oh, come to Cube Night. And they're like, well, I don't have any cards. I'm kind of not into it. It's like, guess what? You don't need cards. And there's
don't
always
have to have
those.
cards.
Hopefully they get that look in their eye like, ooh, I can play Magic. I don't even have to buy cards. I think that's just a cool way to get more people engaged in it. And I mean, it's awesome that people can play and not spend a ridiculous amount of money on these silly cards.
Yeah, I mean, we love Magic. I think one of the worst things about it is that a lot of people feel like there's a big barrier to entry financially.
There is in a lot of ways.
There certainly is. I think that ideally there shouldn't be, and that's the beauty of Cube and BattleBox and all this other kind of stuff. But I talk to people sometimes that don't play Magic but are aware of it culturally or like socially, and their impression is like, oh yeah, well you got to pay a bunch of money to play that game, and it's like you don't. I mean, like Limited costs $12. That's as expensive as a movie ticket.
That's optimistic in 2022.
Maybe
but
it's a little more. It's probably as expensive as a movie ticket,
up.
and it's longer than your average movie. Like, it shouldn't be the kind of thing that feels inaccessible to most people. I think being part of making Magic feel more accessible is a great thing to do. So all of this just contributes to the idea of like, don't have people show up with their own decks or their own cards. Have something for them there to play.
Totally. So I think that related to this and thinking about your audience and like the kinds of people you're trying to engage with, maybe you are trying to get people that literally don't own Magic cards, they've been playing Scrabble and you want to get them playing Magic again.
Which you might think we're exaggerating. We are not. We've had multiple people that have like, yeah, I played as a kid. I have like a little box full of like random beat up revised cards that I played when I was a child that I can't possibly play against any other Magic players in any constructed way.
And what's difficult is that Magic takes so much context to understand that. Like,
right.
Some people will come and just be like, oh, where do I go to play these cards? Like, who else has a deck that I can play with? It's like, well...
And it's like, you go to 1996,
that's
my
a little
dude.
bit difficult, but here's an alternative where maybe you can still play some of those cards, or, get inspired by this, and then maybe you'll use those cards to build your own cube soon.
But and the other thing I'll say is, I think a lot of people get introduced to Magic through Commander now, which... is fine. I really don't want to rag on Commander because I think it's a beautiful format. I think it solves
in so many ways.
The reason it succeeded is because it is great in so many ways. I think it's a bad way to learn Magic. It's really complicated, having multiple different players you have to pay attention to the board states of, and everyone's a giant singleton deck with a bunch of copies of cards you've never heard of before. It's so much to like try and get up to speed to do that.
I mean, you're saying that, but approaching a cube draft is also a lot of complexity in novel cards.
It is, but something like a battle box or the starter decks, those I think are more approachable ways to like get at a similar idea. And I think the actual gameplay, once you have a cube draft deck, is much more approachable than, a 4-person pot of Commander. So just more broadly, also having another way that somebody that shows up to the local game store that is interested in Magic to get into the game that is not, well, you kind of have to play Commander because that's what we play around here, and there isn't people playing Standard. So having another alternative, I think, is a great thing just for the community in general, to have like another way that people showing up can possibly play. That doesn't mean, well, you got to drop $50-$60 on a starter deck and probably another $100 on upgrades, and then you have to learn the ins and outs of all of these cards and their mechanics, and you have to learn about Rule Zero conversations and the sort of politics and social nature of these games. Like, for everything that's great about Commander, I think it's a format that's fundamentally for really invested players, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, that's a weird aspect of Commander that in some ways it does feel like it is. At the same time, it is.
It was invented by extremely invested players. Like,
True.
It was invented by judges that were like, we've already played all the other ways to play Magic, and we really want like some other way to play these cards that are sitting in our collections that are kind of gathering dust. I think it's a great format for really invested players, and I think it's not great as a way to learn Magic. But as the most popular constructed format, it is the way people learn these days. So
yeah, that's true.
Got to acknowledge that.
No! What are you waiting for? Do it!
So I think there's some things that are worth considering, again, as we're talking about sort of the audience that you're trying to curate, considerations you might make for the actual cubes that you're going to be bringing and playing at...
Ooh, good call, Anthony. This wasn't in my notes.
Okay, great. I think the first thing is thinking about that audience. If you have people that are newer to the game, less experienced in the game that you want to attract and bring into the group, potentially have a cube that is more accessible to them in terms of complexity, in terms of familiarity of the cards.
In terms of Oracle text being correct.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great thing in terms of, them being in the native language that your players speak and not being full art and not missing the text.
These things are not givens. Like, it may sound obvious, but people show up with their cube and it's like, hey, what's this card? It's in Korean and I've never seen it before. And it's like, well...
cool art. I don't know what this is. I think also just if you're designing a cube that is going to be played with a wider range of players, seeding in some themes that are a little bit more obvious that new players can latch onto is really powerful. I've been really happy with my main regular cube for this, that there's a couple themes like zombies where you see a couple cards that say, if you control a zombie, do this cool thing. And that is both a pretty, it's an archetype which is viable. It's also something that's players feel like they're in control when they're saying, oh, I see a theme that I can latch onto. Whereas a lot of the other themes are a little bit more emergent. It's more difficult to see that, oh yeah, I want to put tokens with my thing that's pumping up my team. Like, that's not that much harder to see, but it's a lot harder to see than just literally it says zombie and the card type zombie is on these other creatures, so I'm going to care about those together.
And this is like just bleeding into cube design in general and everything we talk about in the show every single week, but I think a lot of people are maybe in the position where they haven't played their cube with a tons of new people. Maybe they have a couple people they play with, or they mostly talk about it online. And I think you should be very serious about thinking about card inclusions and the overall design of the cube if your goal is to get more people to play it and to grow the play group. Because there's a lot of things that maybe we talk about and you're like, well, who cares? Like, sure, the initiative is complicated, but, you know, you have to learn it once and then you just like play with it from there on out.
There are so many things in Magic that you just have to learn once and then you know it.
A huge, I mean, I think honestly over the past 12 months, 18 months, a big part of what has shaped our drive in our cube design and talking so much about complexity is seeing new people come out to this cube night and be like, oh yeah, that sucks. Like, it sucks that you have to confirm which burn spells can actually deal damage to a planeswalker or deal damage to a player because of all the sort of oracle text that changes over time. It sucks that you've never played with a double-sided card and so you have to flip it over in the draft and read it. Like, these things are all
worst
costs.
Case, don't even realize there's a second face to the card.
Yeah, I mean, these things are all costs that matter all the time, but they matter so much more when you have people that are new to your cube, new to cube drafting in general, and that you're specifically trying to like make sure they have a good time and come out again.
Totally.
I think people are gonna probably lose a bunch when they start playing cube. That's just gonna be a natural thing. Making losing not feel awful, I think, is a good game design principle in general. And one thing I found is really successful there is just letting the person that is losing still do something cool and still feel like they did something that they wanted to do and succeeded in some way.
So maybe don't start people who are new to Cube in an environment where they're going to get Wasteland Rent.
I was going to say strip mind out or, you know, whatever, Armageddon or Mind Twisted, whatever your feel bad is. Because then it's like, well, I didn't do anything cool. I just, you know, lost to this thing that I didn't even know was going to completely ruin my entire day. To come back to Patrick again, Patrick looms large in our life. He's a big personality and a wonderful guy. When we did the rotisserie draft of the Bun Magic Cube in person, Patrick's record was not great. I forget what it was, maybe 2-5 or something. But Patrick had a great time, and he kept saying, like, dude, I'm doing awful, but I'm having so much fun.
And this is really going to undermine my previous point.
Well, he was the one doing the Ren and 6 Wasteland locking, but he like had a very synergistic lands matter kind of deck that he was really excited about, even though it didn't do well. And I think that thinking about, I think honestly, it's the kind of zombie thing too, right? Like, oh, my zombie deck didn't do well, but like one game I got to like really go off with my Diagraph Colossus and, you know, my Relentless Dead, and it felt really cool to be able to like get this engine going.
Yeah, having like obvious sort of like bingo card or, you know, like mini games that players can focus on and still feel like they're rewarded for trying to meet some goals is really valuable to getting people to enjoy the draft.
Yeah, and like other things like maybe more obvious power outliers, just so people can look at a pack and realize, oh, that seems better than everything else. I'm going to pick it, and when I play it, I'm going to win games. Like, that might not be in your set of goals for like your hypothetical imagined spiky group of 8 people that knows the cube inside and out, like 8 copies of you, but that might be really valuable for somebody that's new to the cube. And make sure that power outlier is fun to play with and not a total groaner, because that's going to set a lot of the tone of a lot of the games.
Right. So we're talking a little bit about making cubes that are a little bit more accessible, but I think just as important is having kind of a range of experiences. A couple other people mentioned in the questions that you put out on Twitter that, well, one limitation of cube is it might get a little bit stale. I don't agree with those people.
I saw one person mention that, and I hesitated from getting into back and forth.
We're not gonna harp on that too much, but I think regardless, it is super valuable to have a range of experiences. So if you have 2 cubes that are very opposite ends of a spectrum, you know, I think that it will happen pretty naturally that other people will get invested in building cubes. So encouraging them to explore new space just gives you more flexibility. You know, it's great that we have in our environment the Degenerate Micro Cube and the Turbo Cube, and those are really fun to do every once in a while. And players show up and they're like, that was really cool. Let's do something next time that's a little bit more like normal Magic. So I think especially as we're kind of getting to the place where we can actually fill multiple pods, that's super valuable, because we can just say like, hey, which of these extremes are you looking for? Or you want something more in the middle this week? But even just shifting up week to week gives people the opportunity to explore different aspects of the game and keeps things fresh and exciting.
Yeah, I thought a couple weeks ago, it was like the last Cube night where everyone was in town before the holidays. We had, I think it was 12 people show up for, maybe it was 14 people actually, show up for a Cube night. And I have the Degenerate Microcube with me because it was what Theo wanted to draft in his last draft before he went back home. And someone else had brought a proxied version of Ryan Sachs's cube that was on Magic Online. Not the Combat Cube. I think it's called the Classic Cube. And those are very different Magic experiences. One is actually, I think what a lot of people think Cube is pretty close to like the Magic Online Vintage Cube. It's playing a lot of iconic, powerful cards, and it's got play patterns that are similar to that. And the Degenerate Micro Cube is totally different. But I think it was a good example of, hey, we said, look, the Degenerate Micro Cube, you really need 8 people. So we have 14 here. Can we have 8 of them draft this cube? Because it makes this draft experience way better when we're picking all the cards and not having to worry about a combo getting broken up. And having those sort of abilities to like make compromises to make things work, I think is huge in what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and I drafted a really awesome green-white. I know Ryan Sachs loves Selesnya and just really powers up that archetype in there, and it was a lot of fun.
Does he not? Are you being sarcastic?
I'm being sarcastic because I don't think anybody likes Selesnya in Cube except for me.
I think Selesnya is cool.
Great.
We just need like the Selesnya Uro to get printed. Then everyone will love Selesnya all of a sudden.
We already it's called Cassili Pride Mage.
It is, Anthony. It is simply not,
Cassili
unfortunately.
Pride Mage. So I think something else that helps with, especially as you have more and more cubes, is having cubes that have a fairly clear hook or descriptor. I mean, we talk about this all the time. I do tend to like not this. I was
about to say, I'm like, you are not a good example of this because everyone's like, what the hell is regular cube?
It's just normal. It's just cards I like. But I think that I do see the value in that when you can say, hey, this is the cube that's all about doing busted stuff on turn 3, or this is the cube that's all about, fair mid-range matchup, or this has weird color restrictions. Having some way to describe the environments that you're offering pretty succinctly can get people engaged quicker.
Yeah, I mean, I love what our friend John from Cult of Cube does with his cube names. I mean, he's a literary professor, and his cube names are Eleasis and Cartographia, and like it's art, it's prose. Like he's like making a work of creative fiction, but that's a lot harder than, hey, this is the Brea Cube. There's no green in it.
No
Brea
green.
Cube. This is the Degenerate Micro Cube. It's small and degenerate, right? Like these things are like way more blunt. They're not as beautiful and poetic, but people get it immediately. They're like, great, okay, if I want to play Brea kinds of cards and Brea kinds of themes, I know what that cube's all about.
And Brea, it wheels around a lot. The card's
card's not
medium.
actually that good is the thing. It's 4 colors. It's kind of hard to cast.
I think there's also just some logistical things you can consider. Because we've been doing this cube draft more, we want to be more accommodating in terms of having different ways to break up pods. I've actually bumped up my main cube to accommodate 10 players, which just gives us a little bit more flexibility. Are there other things you can think of in terms of just logistics that make it work?
I mean, if you want to go above and beyond, shuffling and making packs ahead of time, I think is a nice thing. So you just show up and people are ready to draft.
It is a little bit harder if you're not sure how groups are going to break up, and maybe
true.
You want to do like for 4 players, like 4 packs of. What do we do? 4 packs of 11, something like that.
Yeah, if you're going to end up grid drafting, then the packs don't really matter as much. Yeah, so that is not always possible, but you can do that maybe just to make that a little easier for people. Definitely show up early. Don't be the last one to show up and have people sitting there for 20 minutes being like, is Cube Night happening tonight? I don't even know. There's not a cube here. Like, you're here for Cube Night, right? Be there early. Yeah, I don't know. I think we've covered a lot. I think we've covered almost everything. So, I mean, in summary, be consistent. Think about the things you can do as the host of the event, whether that's making the event comfortable and approachable for players, whether that's making the event appealing to an LGS owner by expressing the fact that you're going to clean up and you're going to make sure you're conscious of time. I think timing rounds is great for no matter where you're playing, just so people have an expectation, not just of start time, but of end time or approximate end time, so they're not making some indefinite commitment. I think all those things are great. One little logistical thing we didn't mention, which I think is interesting, is if you do have a weird odd number and someone has to sit out a draft, like let them know that, hey, if someone wants to drop, you can hop in and start playing their deck. I've done that before with my cube where I've been the 9th person, let everyone draft, and some player had to go or didn't have a fun time, and I'm like, that's fine, you can go. I'll just pick up your deck and then keep playing it so that we don't have a person that has a bye in the last round or whatever.
Yeah, and that's actually kind of fun because you get to play a deck you might not have drafted, and then if you lose, you can just blame the person who drafted the deck.
Yeah, exactly. It's perfect. Win, win, win.
I would say do it. I think that...
Yeah, do it.
Just do it!
We have said this pretty periodically that I think Cube is sort of poised to become a lot more popular. I see it mentioned more and more. I just feel like the community is growing, and the thing that we need in a lot of like local areas is just some people to take up leadership and start Cube Nights and get the people that are not like super enthusiastic about designing cubes but just might want to play them to have that opportunity.
Yeah. And then tell all these new players about your favorite podcast, Lucky Paper Radio.
I was going to say, then tell them to go to CubeCon next year, but I guess
Sure, whatever.
I guess
We'll get there
you can listen to
eventually.
this podcast.
I mean, if they're fans of podcasts, we have a podcast. I'm proud of the show. I'll put modesty aside for a second. I think we make a good show that people can relatively easily hop into and get invested in. So refer us to them. Find other content you like that's Cube related. Whatever got you excited about Cube, like show that to your friends and other people in the play group. Get them excited for the same reasons. I would love, there'd be no greater joy for me than if us making this episode, giving people tips, sharing our experience working on our own local playgroup led to people successfully starting a playgroup in their own town. That would be the greatest possible accomplishment, because that's what I love most about this game. That's the best part of Cube. It's the best part of Magic, and so if we can even be a little part of making that happen for some other folks, that would be huge.
Yeah, let us know how it goes and be patient.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will be hard the first 4, 8, 12 times you do your dedicated Cube Night to maybe not feel like, oh, this is failing, it's not working, it's going badly. And you just have to be invested, and it's still going to be fun, right? Make it fun when 4 people show up. Make it fun to be there, not like a failed Cube draft where we couldn't fill a pod, but a thing that was still great, and maybe some people won't even necessarily know it's not what you wanted. Make whatever happens to be fun and exciting. I think you're likely to find success, because I think most people listening to this episode know that we have a lot of things on our side with how great and fun and beautiful this format is. And so it's really just a matter of getting people over that hump. It is an unapproachable thing. I liken it a lot to Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons is great if you have a really dedicated DM that's really good at their job and is willing to do all the work of being a DM. Dungeons & Dragons is awful if you don't have that, and someone's just I read the book for the first time, and I'm trying to make this work. It could be really awkward and kind of clunky. That's the kind of attitude I think you should approach this with. You are the DM. You are the Cube Master. How do you... that's the title of this episode, I think. No, it should be more practical than that. You're the Cube Master. Approach this project like that. All right, no time for a Pack One, Pick One. I think we might move Pack One, Pick Ones to the end of the episodes. That way we can do them if we have time and not if we don't have time. And also, it's worth noting, we're hesitant to do Pack One, Pick Ones on episodes like this, where it's designed to be an evergreen resource and something we want to be able to send people maybe that are not regular listeners of the show, because if they have to listen to 8 minutes of us doing the thing, which is not the reason they started listening to that episode, it's kind of a bummer. So maybe we'll move them to the end. But this episode's already a little over an hour, so no time this week.
Can we save this cube that I picked out, though? It looks
I love
pretty
this
cool,
cube.
so.
Yeah. Well, teaser. The cube we have lined up for the next Pack One, Pick One is really cool.
It's a cool cube.
Yeah.
It could be yours if you've submitted a cube.
Yeah. Tune in every week from here on out until we do it to find out. Without any further ado, that's it for this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. All of our music is produced by DJ James Nasty. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. The show is produced by Anthony and I thinking really hard about Magic cards and how to get people to play our cubes, and then speaking about it into microphones. Thanks for putting on all the work to make this playgroup so great, Anthony.
I mean, it wasn't that much work. I just showed up, had a beer, relaxed, shuffle up some cards, and play some Magic the Gathering. Something else, there's a lot to this. We didn't even talk about how we pick the cubes to play, because we do have a lot of cubes in our group, but maybe it's just
I think
too
that's
much.
a next level
That's the
issue.
next level,
If you get to
yeah.
the point where you have so many people showing up with cubes they want to play, then you've done it. You succeeded. Good job.
Yeah.
It's a good problem to have.
Tune in next time for next level issues.
It's a good problem to have, but it does annoy me. I'm like, we're the reason you got excited about Cube, and now we have to play your cubes and not ours all the
No,
time?
I love that. I love when I get to be the one that shows up with just a playmat and some dice.
No, I do like it too, even though I would like to draft my cube as much as possible.